everybody, my name is Luke Marr and this is HauteLeMode, and today on HauteLeMode we are reacting to the Sleeping Beauty's Reawakening Fashion exhibit because the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Costume Institute did a tour video of the exhibit. And the thing is, with the Met, we talk about all the outfits and the after parties and what's going to happen beforehand, but it's also really cool, I think, to actually get to see the exhibit, which is the whole reason the Met Gala exists. Yes, there's the pomp and the money and the wealth and the excess and the privilege and luxury and all those things, and I get it. But the reason for all of that is because the Costume Institute, which is one of the premier fashion and costume collections in the world, and that's all because the Costume Institute has to do its own fundraising. They don't get funding from the museum, so the Met Gala really is the time for the exhibit to really blow up. Funding to get all the money so that they can keep all of the garments that they have. There are about 33,000 in their collection, as well as funding to actually put together the cool exhibits that they do. So that's why it happens. And for those of you that don't get to come to New York and see the cool exhibit up close and personal, I thought it would be fun if we get to actually see the exhibit via video. I've seen the exhibit in person. I go the morning of to the Met Gala preview, so I get to see the exhibit before all the celebrities even do, and it's really fun, and I do love a good fashion exhibit. I wanted to share it with all of you and get into a little bit of the geeky history. So without further ado, let's get into this reaction. Oh, this is a very cool room. See, I like a detail shot. The flowers, the roses, the beauties that have been sleeping.
Here we are in the exhibition Sleeping Beauties, Reawakening Fashion, and I'm delighted to take you on a tour.
Andrew Bolton, if you do not know, is the curator in charge of the Costume Institute. He puts together the spring exhibitions for the Met every year. He works very closely with Anna Wintour. He also is the partner of Tom Brown, if you did not know. And he's just overall a pretty cool guy that makes fun fashion exhibits that we get to see every year.
When an item of clothing enters the Costume Institute's collection, its status is changed irrevocably. What was once a vital part of a person's lived experience becomes a lifeless work of art that can no longer be worn, heard, touched, or smelled. The exhibition endeavors to resuscitate garments in our permanent collection by reactivating their sensory qualities and re-engaging our sensorial perceptions.
I think that's the cool thing about the exhibit in general. Oh, you know, beautiful dress, we see them in a certain context, or whether they're juxtaposed oftentimes against garments that maybe they were based on, and the way that they've changed over the years, you know, put into the context of certain fashion designers' lexicons and work. This year, there really was this sort of first time ever sense thing, and I don't want to say like the Museum of Ice Cream or any of those kind of like new kid art kind of museum styles that are, I think, taking over a little bit of the art world, this interactive element. But I do think it is cool to hear it in that context, and that's kind of why I like this idea, because again, we normally go to the exhibits and we just look and we say, oh, so pretty, oh, so nice. Oh, I'd never wear that. Ooh, who would ever buy that? I think it's cool to feel it more than just to see it.
It aims to extend the principally visual readings of fashion within museums to multisensory and non-visual interpretations. The show unfolds as a series of case studies united by the theme of nature. Fashions inspired by the natural environment are well represented in our collection, ranging from flowers and foliage, birds and insects, and fish and shells. Motifs that constitute the three sections of the exhibition: earth, air, and water.
I thought it was land, sea, and sky, but two each. You're missing the Fire Nation.
In many ways, nature serves as the ultimate metaphor for fashion, its rebirth and renewal, but also its transience and ephemerality. These latter qualities are evident in the Sleeping Beauties that ground several of the case studies, which are self-destructing with the passage of time.
A lot of people that I talked to were like, I didn't really love the exhibit. I think that this was an exhibit for like fashion nerds. Like, you have to really be like, I love clothing. I like the history of it. I like to understand what it is and what it means. See this with this Loewe look, which originally was on the runway from Jonathan Anderson, but this grass jacket will die over time throughout the exhibit. This one was specially made for the exhibit, and so as the exhibit comes to a close, I believe in early September, all this grass that is really luscious and green and lovely will be brown and rotted and will be falling apart. And a lot of the dresses that we just saw that are laying down, you get to see a real, not conservation element where somebody's sitting there teaching you how things come back together after they've fallen apart, but you do get to understand why certain garments over time do fall apart even though they're beautifully made. Certain things, certain techniques, certain applications do in reality damage the garment regardless of how well it was done, and so that's why you get to see especially in the placards that sort of read and teach you about what you're looking at, how and why these items were damaged just because of their own beauty, because of they're just so beautiful. You know what I mean? Like the techniques and the work that went into them will just ruin them over time.
Let's begin the tour. The first dress we encounter in the exhibition is a Sleeping Beauty that's suffering from inherent vice, which is a term conservators use to describe a quality intrinsic to an artwork that is the very cause of its ruin.
I didn't know that. Inherent vice. Interesting.
In clothing, inherent vice stems from a variety of factors, including the materials themselves, which is the case with this remarkable ball gown by Charles Frederick Worth. As you can see, the pale green satin has suffered catastrophic loss of its vertical warp threads.
I don't know if it's me. Maybe I'm going colorblind. Maybe we'll talk about it in a minute, but pale green, it did not look pale green to me, so
resulting in large areas where only the horizontal weft threads remain. In contrast, the ivory satin is still robust despite similar wear, which suggests that there's an inherent weakness in the green fabric.
And so I wonder if it's because the green fabric, the way that it is, and maybe the color application that's used on it to make it green, maybe that's what damaged the fibers even more than non-fiber. I think that's what he's getting at.
Unfortunately, there's no current conservation treatment that can fully stabilize the satin.
That's crazy.
The extreme fragility of the gown precludes it from being dressed on a mannequin, so in the exhibition it's displayed flat in a glass case.
I think that the idea of Sleeping Beauty, a lot of people are like, oh, it's Cinderella, but I'm pretty positive that certain garments within the collection actually almost are put in a morgue of sort. Like they have to have trays that pull out, or they're kept in boxes. A lot of fashion garments are kept in certain boxes. I believe that the boxes that are like the premium boxes are called Gaylord, which tracks. But there is a company that does sell like very special premier boxes. I have a few of them because I have a few quote unquote Sleeping Beauties of my own, and I bought them and they're expensive. But that's kind of why this idea of like the Sleeping Beauties thing is that they're resting in their little coffins of sorts, the glass that is protecting them, like Snow White and the women of these fairy tales. I think it's a really cool concept. It's multi-layered. I know a lot of people didn't understand it, and I get that, but I think Andrew explaining it a lot more also helps you really to like get what he's getting at.
And while conservation friendly, this display denies visitors the truest expression of the dress, which requires the dimensionality of a body. To simulate its intended appearance, we virtually resurrected the gown through a Pepper's Ghost hologram. To achieve this, the dress underwent an extensive regimen of digital scanning, photography, construction analysis, and pattern making, and then the content was manipulated to fit a digital avatar.
The crazy thing about this too, I think, is every fashion exhibit you go to, everything is stagnant. And it's so beautiful to see a lot of these pieces up close and personal, and it's because they're stagnant. But if we think about it, that original Charles Frederick Worth gown moved. It moved when it was shown for the first time. It moved when it was on the wearer's body. It had movement to it. It's built into the clothing. But again, the thing is, a lot of garments, especially when they're in the realm of costume conservation, you can't move them because it will damage them. They just slowly sort of die over time. And so this idea of movement is kind of constantly lost when we're looking back. We see pictures, we see portraits, we see photographs, we see all those things, but we don't ever see the garment really in movement. And I think it is actually kind of a radical thing to see it recreated, even though it's digitally, but to see it recreated.
The gown was designed to be worn to a ball, so we decided that the Pepper's Ghost should dance, which involved motion capturing the movements of a professional dancer and applying them to the avatar.
It's so wild.
The first section of the exhibition, Earth, is a celebration of flowers in fashion, an exploration of their representation and symbolism. And here we are in a gallery entitled Blurred Blossoms.
I also just want to say that all of the clothing in the exhibit, I was told, do come from the Met's own archive. So there's not really things pulled from other sources. There's no private collections. There's no fashion brand's own archives. Everything, even though this Loewe dress that we're looking at right now is from a very recent collection, was purchased by the museum, which costs money, and also which is something that you need the money for from the Met Gala in order to get to do the exhibit.
Floral imagery was the most popular source of patterning for dress in the 18th century.
Prada, vintage, I mean, that's crazy.
Dating to around the 1750s and 1760s. The blurred pattern of flowers achieves its painterly effects through a labor-intensive technique known as chine à la branche. It was perfected in Lyons during the first half of the 18th century and involved dyeing groups of warp threads, known as branches, before the fabric was woven.
So crazy. So what? I can't even believe that people think of these things.
During the weaving process, the slight pulling of the thread created a hazy appearance resembling a watercolor.
So
In
wow.
motion, chine silks created a rustling sound known as scroop, which is a combination of the words scrape and whoop, which visitors can hear resonating in the hallway.
Yeah, there was a lot of sound in it, which I thought was fun. Connor Ives, Dior.
Here we are in the Red Rose Gallery. There are few flowers, if any, that have been more lauded by poets and painters than the red rose, who have invoked the flower as a symbol of love, beauty, romance, passion, and sexuality. The rose has been equally embraced by designers, as seen here in a few examples that are sartorial sonnets and sculptures in and of themselves. Philip Trace's headpiece evokes the flower's fragility, as
I love it. There was a lot of headpieces too in the exhibit.
beauty, whose smell molecules emanate from the tubes on the wall. The headpiece is sculpted out of red silk duchesse satin for the flower head and green silk polyester satin for the stem, which features real acacia thorns.
I didn't know that. That's kind of crazy.
Yves Saint Laurent's evening dress from his debut collection for Dior is a tribute to Christian Dior himself, who had a passion for both roses and the color red. Saint Laurent integrated other elements of Dior's stylistic lexicon into this homage, such as the asymmetrical sweep of the bodice, with its virtuoso wet drapery and spiraling effect, which gives the illusion that the dress is made from one continuous length of fabric.
It's kind of crazy.
Molecules from the dress can also be smelled through the tubes on the wall.
I didn't even notice that in real life. I mean, see here, you can see that there are these sort of tubes that are sitting on the wall, and you can kind of move and smell the tubes and smell the dress. And some people said they could smell it. Some people said that they couldn't. I could smell it and had a nice sort of faint rosy-esque scent to it. Not all of the smells were that nice. A lot of the smells I was like, that's vile, aging, old. Oh yeah, this room, see this room, speaking of decrepit, awful smells. To the right of this, there was like a panel of the wall that you could scratch, and it was like, oh, this is what the woman smelled like. And I was like, it's awful. And I don't mean any offense to that dead woman, but it didn't smell good. But I do think it's really cool to sort of see this idea of, ooh, this is what they smelled like? This is what things did? Ooh, okay, gross.
This gallery is called The Scent of a Man.
Oh, Francesco Rizzo, Marnie, yeah.
Were featured in Francesco Rizzo's Spring-Summer 2024 collection for Marnie, which was based on scent and the memories it induces. Each dress in the collection was sprayed with a scent inspired by
I didn't know that.
memory of a chance encounter with a young man on a visit to Paris at the age of 14. The decoupage-like appearance of the ensembles references an elaborate 19th century scrapbook that Rizzo found in a flea market in London. Both pieces are made of a cotton canvas base, digitally printed with a floral pattern onto which hand-cut flowers from the same pattern have been glued to the surface. This particular ensemble features hand-painted aluminum flowers on wire stems that can only be fully appreciated in movement. The sounds can be heard in the hallway, and they remind us that orality is no less pivotal in the recovery of memory than smell.
Which I did think was cool. I mean, it was very loud, you know, you're hearing like clang, clang, clang went the dress. But I did think it was rather interesting to, again, like hear these things move and hear these things operate. Because again, we've all kind of seen this dress. It was wild to see. But unless you were watching the video, and even if you are watching the video of the runway, you don't really get to hear it. The music is loud, or they're playing music over top and you can't hear anything. So it is interesting, again, to give people the experiences of these things in movement and the smell of these things. Yeah, this was also crazy too. All these tubes and wires.
And the gallery actually appears like a garden, planted with hats and dresses blooming with a wide variety.
Loewe, yeah. I loved all these headpieces.
Seen here is Christian Dior's ball gown, titled May, which which was featured in his Spring-Summer 1953 tulip.
Beautiful.
It comprises a fitted strapless bodice and a full dome-shaped skirt, embroidered with summer grasses and red clovers. The embroidery was executed by Rebay, whose patterning of meadow gone to weed
Really
is strewn with the red clover's distinctive trifoliate leaves and a few rarer quadrifoliate leaves. Lily the Valley was Dior's lucky flower, and his seamstresses would incorporate a sprig of the flower into the hemlines of his dresses.
I didn't know that. I think Andrew will probably talk about these, but these are all smelling salts, which I never really smelled a smelling salt, to be completely honest. But what they did is each of the garments around the exhibit in this room decanted the smell and the scent in the smelling salts. So you could look at the dress and then smell the dress without having to get all up close and personal with the dress, because they don't want you to do that, obviously, because you'll get your spit and spot and blah, 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 all over it. I love, again, this idea of you being able to incorporate another sense into the experience of seeing. It's wild.
This coat was
I
featured
didn't even talk about it, so thank God I talked about it.
in Jonathan Anderson's Spring-Summer 2023 menswear collection for Loewe. Its verdant display of organic embroidery, which negotiates the paradox of nature and artifice, serves as a metaphor for fashion's ephemerality.
Yeah, they
The
grew
coat
the
was
grass.
a collaboration with Paula Alagui Escalona, a bio-designer who cultivates plants to grow on clothes to create a more conscious and sustainable fashion industry.
It's so
She
crazy.
planted the coat with oat, rye, and wheatgrass, which took 20 days to grow in a purpose-built greenhouse, as seen in the time-lapse video.
It's so wild. This jacket will die over the course. They weren't going to go in every day and, keep it going. And again, the thing about Sleeping Beauties and the idea of all these garments over time is just slowly they become ruined. And it's just a natural element of the world, something that happens to plants, to animals, to microorganisms, but it's also something that happens to clothes. It's something that at least most clothes now, prior to the invention of plastics in clothes and synthetic fabrics, it was just something that clothing would disintegrate. And so people would also sort of try to take little pieces and elements of different clothing and sort of incorporate them into new things in order to keep those pieces sort of alive and around and updated and fresh. But I mean, even Marie Antoinette, I know that the storming of the Palace of Versailles had something to do with it, but the idea of this person who is one of the bastions of fashion, quote unquote, none of her garments are really around. It's very rare to find something that belonged to Marie Antoinette. You can find other garments from the late 1700s, the early 1700s maybe, but it's really difficult to maintain a lot of those pieces. Even George Washington jacket, a jacket that he had worn, that shit was in shambles. That shit was a mess. And it's because it's really, really difficult to maintain those pieces.
Here we are in the gallery, The Garden Live, and this particular case study is a transitional gallery between the earth and air themes of the exhibition and explores the abundant life of gardening and embroidery were closely related in the late 16th and early 17th centuries,
Makes
with
sense.
each discipline borrowing from one another. A style of gardening known as embroidered became popular throughout Europe, imitating the type of needlework seen on garments like this embroidered women's waistcoat from 1615 to 1620.
That's
The
cool.
embroidery presents a vision of an English garden seething with vitality. Strawberries ripen, pots burst open, and birds snatch at dragonflies. This dynamic Arcadia is brought to life by the animation projected on the dome ceiling. Some of the tactile experience of wearing such a densely embroidered garment is also writ large on the gallery walls.
I like that. I think it's important to sort of showcase the tactile element of it. Like the touch aspect, I think, is often lost. I did hear that this particular exhibition has been very heavily touched, especially things that aren't meant to be touched. I know that there's like a wall that is tactile and meant to be sort of caressed to look at and look like a Dior dress early on in the exhibit. But I heard that a lot of people are touching the dresses they're not supposed to be touching. But I like this idea again of building in what things felt like. I think it's important.
By Karl Lagerfeld for Chanel
It
is
gives people a
directly
better
inspired
understanding.
by the embroidery style of the women's waistcoat. Lagerfeld was an incurable, if somewhat subversive historicist, and here he combines the lavishness of English Renaissance embroidery with the House of Chanel's most recognizable icon, the double C logo.
So these buttons all, I believe, are different bugs. But the thing is, to even look at them up close, because it was kind of like a table, you could look in, it was really hard to see. So what they did is they projected the button imagery up top. So again, you can see things and appreciate things much more than you normally can with just your naked little eyes. Yeah, love.
Here we are in the gallery Beetle Wings. Beetles account for about 1/4 of all animal species on Earth,
Tracks.
and humans have employed them as ornamentation for centuries.
Well, the other thing is a lot of colors come from crushed up beetles and bugs and animals and mollusks and things. So I do think it's rather important to understand, again, like blue doesn't just emerge out of nowhere. It's the same thing with colors like ochre or certain purples is like only comes from, is it cypress? There's certain mollusks that they ground up to create this really vibrant purple that you can only find in certain islands and regions and things like I think we take a lot of things for granted, so I think it's cool to actually, again, get to understand why these things are rather important and why they haven't just materialized out of nowhere.
Displayed here engage variously with this legacy of adornment. They range from the hyperreal, as with Olivia Cheng's organza dress, covered with whole jewel beetles sustainably harvested, to the
I assume those aren't real because I'm looking at the legs and I feel that they're not real. But this is a good example of a garment that over time, those beetles are going to tug. They're heavy and they are going to eventually pull and rip that fabric apart.
as with Dries van Noten's ensemble, decorated with synthetic beetle wing sequin. Van Noten's ensemble was inspired by Jan Faber's 2002 installation, Heaven of Delight, in the Palais Royal in Brussels, in which the artists cover the ceiling with over 1.5 million elytra, an effect simulated in the animation.
Wow.
Here we are in the gallery Butterflies.
People like
Butterflies have fluttered onto the pages of poets in countless euphoric and enigmatic metaphors, but perhaps the most universal is transformation, stemming from their unique life cycle,
Chrysalises
from
and
caterpillar
caterpillars.
to cocoon to butterfly,
Yeah.
figuratively embodying life, death, and rebirth. Displayed in the center of this gallery is Sarah Burton's butterfly dress, which was featured in her debut collection for Alexander McQueen after its eponymous founder and Burton's mentor took his own life 8 months earlier.
Oh, I didn't even really think about
The dress is
that.
veneered with turkey feathers cut, dyed, and painted
That's
to emulate the
crazy.
iconic pattern of the monarch butterfly. The monarch symbolizes hope, resilience, and endurance, encapsulated in its annual 3,000-mile migration across North America, a journey evoked in the animation filling the gallery.
It's important to plant plants that are native to your region because guess what? The monarch butterfly does a 3,000-mile journey and it only eats one plant, the little caterpillars. It's called the milkweed. So you should find certain milkweeds because there's different species of milkweed that relate to your region. In specific regions is very important because if you're giving them certain non-region specific milkweeds, they get sick and they can die. It's not good. There's a bunch of different plants all over the world that correlate to where you are. I understand wanting to have ornamental and decorative plants and but it's very important to respect the nature of the world. And anytime I can bring up native plants, I will.
Milkweed, which is the only plant on which female monarchs
Andrew Bolton is a native girl.
feed, provides critical fuel for the insect's annual
Agree.
migration. Hilary Taymor celebrated
great
this
show.
unique relationship forged by nature in her Cleaner Strada Spring-Summer 2023 Got Milkweed collection,
It was a goodie.
which featured the dress displayed here, made from dead stock silk organza. The collection was shown at the Brooklyn Greenway Initiative's Naval Cemetery Landscape, which is an official monarch sanctuary.
It's really good. They're really beautiful plants. They're really stunning. They're really lovely. I have a lot. I plant swamp milkweed personally. I don't plant them in New York because I don't have the room for it. But my parents' house, I have swamp milkweed existing. But wherever you live in the US, there are native plants that are based where you are. And they're really beautiful and they're really stunning. And the craziest thing is you will see so many bugs and beautiful bees and butterflies and moths and things that you never in your life would have ever thought to see. And it's because, you know, people love lawns and lawns are the best thing in the world. They're really not. They're actually really, really not. So if you can find native plants to your region, try to plant them. I think you'll really enjoy it. And you'll also feel a lot better if you get climate change anxiety, like I do.
James both
I love a Charles James.
in his iconic butterfly ball gown from 1955. It comprises a body-hugging chrysalis sheath.
I didn't even think about that. aspect and element of it.
matching ground, and an exuberant wing bustle skirt of nylon.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the chrysalis.
Ganga reveals, however,
Ah,
of its materials combined with the volatility of its construction foretells its inevitable demise.
that's also so crazy to me, is that, like, again, you can construct something so beautifully and it's hand done and it takes so long and takes so much effort and all that, and just because of the way it's made, it's gonna fall apart. You know, it's not gonna fall apart in 2 weeks like we have nowadays in the fast fashion world, but just the garment, unless it's really kept super well, will just get destroyed because that's what happens.
While the damaged garment was used as a showpiece by both the designer and later by museums, the other was worn only a few times and stored carefully in the owner's
Wow,
closet for nearly 60 years.
that's so insane.
After having gone through the gallery Birds, we're now in the gallery The Nightingale and the Rose.
And when the moon shone in the heavens, the nightingale flew to the rose tree and set her breast against the thorn.
Aw, that was also kind of crazy though. That's a real dead
By
bird.
Salmon Costin.
I'm pretty positive.
Interlocking briars of patinated broth enclosing the body of a taxidermy nightingale. It was inspired by Oscar Wilde's 1888 fairy tale, The Nightingale and the Rose, in which a nightingale pours out its lifeblood by piercing its breast on the thorn of a rose bush in order
That's so
to
wild.
produce a perfect red rose for a lovesick boy.
Yeah, he better be grateful.
Costin's neckpiece is an amphitheatre of millinery spanning the time of Wilde's fairy tale through the early 20th century, forming a macabre index of both brutality and creativity.
Yeah, I guess I always forget about birds being such a thing of headpieces.
Resulted in the formation of organisations such as the Audubon Society in the United States
Shout out
and the
to
Royal
Audubon.
Society for the Protection of Birds in England.
Damn.
In the next few galleries, we move into the theme of water. This particular case study explores the
The McQueen oyster dress, like the idea that they had to ship that standing up is like so crazy to me. Like that dress is so wild. And it's so crazy too because like in the actual show, the model is literally like ripping these razor clam seashells off the dress and like breaking them and cracking them.
enduring
And
appeal of
it's
seashells,
just, it's insane.
which in part stems from their ability to amplify ambient noise frequencies. Alexander McQueen exploited the inherent resonance of shells in his razor clam dress, which can be heard in the hallway. The dress
So insane.
collection, which related Victorian depictions of insanity to the sublime beauty of nature. Here we are in a
So
gallery
crazy.
called the Siren. In her original incarnation, the mythological siren was portrayed as a bird woman. By the 7th century, she was depicted with a fishtail, and by the Middle Ages, her reputation as a deadly, sea-dwelling seductress was firmly established. In much of Africa and the African diaspora, the archetype of the siren finds a correlation in Mamiwata, whose origins can be traced to ancient African water spirits. Her regional analogue, Mongwa Weletsa, inspired TB.
Oh, I love a Tebe Magugu.
Its print derives from Louis Le
Beautiful.
Breton's engraving, The West Indies Hurricane of 1780, which depicts ships mid-capsize, a scene evoked in the film projected in the gallery. Mamiwata's intangible form is also realized in Torishiju Dumi's ensembles.
Yeah.
Both are made from dead stock offcuts, pieced together on the bias, and finished with overlock stitchwork to create a rippling effect that manifests a human-fish hybrid.
Andrew always puts a Tom Brown in there, which we love. Beautiful, stunning. But these are cool. Listen, these are all mermaid silhouette dresses, and they all sort of move. There's one, the first is by Norman Norrell, then there's one by Marc Jacobs, one by Michael Kors, and one by Joseph Altuzarra, and it's just this idea of like the movement in the way that over time the mermaid silhouette kind of evolved, at least in this regard.
Here we are in the final gallery.
This was also kind of crazy.
This bridal ensemble belonged to New York socialite Natalie Potter, who wore it at her wedding to William Conkling Ladd on December the 4th, 1930. Its cathedral-length train features an expanse of interlocking scallops that recall undulating ocean waves and the concentric circles of seashells. Designed by the Calosseurs at the dawn of the Great Depression, it's devoid of lavish surface embellishment and is made of a blend of silk and cellulose acetate, which was an emerging synthetic fiber that provided an inexpensive alternative to silk. While the overblouse recalls the androgynous silhouette of the youthful 1920s garçon. The skirt, with its elongated hemline, anticipates the more mature and feminine aesthetic of the 1930s. Potter posed in her wedding ensemble for a portrait by Adolphe de Meyer that's displayed on a screen in the gallery. Visitors can find out more about Potter, her wedding, and her ensemble by scanning the QR code on the screen to converse directly with her using artificial intelligence.
Dead. Andrew and AI.
The ultimate ambitions of the exhibition are more long-term than short-term. They include extending the principally unisensory visual readings of fashion within museums to multisensory and non-visual interpretations.
I thought it was a great idea.
Essential preservation and conservation needs of costumes, while still creating sensorially experiential and enlightening exhibitions that encourage personal and participatory connections. This exhibition reminds us that the featured garments, while destined for an eternal slumber within the museum walls, don't forget their sensorial histories. Rather, they're embedded within the very fibers of their being and simply require reactivation through the mind and body, heart and soul of those willing to dream and imagine. We hope you enjoy their temporary reawakenings.
Thanks, Andrew. I thought it was a really great exhibit. I really enjoyed it. I feel like I learned a lot actually reading all the placards, which it's not that I don't learn a lot every single time, but I feel like always the placards could be a little bit more descriptive of what we're looking at. And this is the first time I feel like we're really seeing that. I enjoyed the exhibit, even though there were smells and things that I thought were gross. I love a fashion exhibit. I love learning about the way that the fashion conservator aspect of the practice of making sure these pieces stay intact is a thing, and I think it's cool that people actually get to see that. So I want to know what some of you think. If you went to the exhibit, please let me know. If you don't get to go to the exhibit, I'm sorry, but listen, still a good exhibit, and buy the book. It's coming out. I will see you guys all in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and TTYL.